I turned the bottle of lubricant in my hand as if it were the final piece of proof I didn't want to believe. It was small, cold, and so silent that the sound of my heartbeat felt louder than anything else. "I know I'm about to do something I shouldn't," I whispered, mostly to myself. "But I don't have anywhere left to place my trust." I'm not someone who doubts easily. For years I'd grown used to Mark's steadiness. My husband, the man who carried a calmness strong enough to make anyone believe everything under his control was safe. But these past few weeks, that calm felt more like a sealed surface hiding a dark current underneath. Everything started with the perfume scent. Too sweet, not mine, not anything Mark ever wore. He said someone bumped into him in the elevator. I believed him the first time. The second time, he said he tried on a new scent at the store. Mark never liked trying anything new, not even fragrances. Then came the phone. He swiped messages away so fast I couldn't even catch the color of the sender's icon. His tone shifted when I asked. "Just a lot of work." But Mark had never hidden work from me. He was the kind of man who carried stress home like a shadow, never covered, never edited. The late nights started to increase too. His explanations grew so short they scared me with how little they held. All of it could have been brushed aside, if not for the way he changed every time Claire walked into the room. Claire, my daughter-in-law, who lost her husband 3 years ago, the person I considered the last piece of my son. She'd been living with me since the funeral. I thought time would pull her out of her grief, but it only made her softer, in a fragile way. Whenever I suggested she move out, she just shook her head. "I can't, Jenna. Here. I can still feel him." I understood that feeling. I'd lived on the traces of someone I lost, too. But Mark, every time Claire appeared, he tightened in a way so subtle only someone who'd lived beside him for years could notice. A quick glance, a half-second pause in his breathing, a silence that didn't belong. I told myself I was being paranoid, but no one stays paranoid when the evidence keeps finding them. One night, I overheard Mark speaking to her in a low, gentle tone that made my skin prickle. "You're still young and already lost your husband. If staying here makes you feel safe, then stay. No one's forcing you to move on." The words sounded like kindness from an older, understanding man. But underneath them was something that made me take a small step back. Then Claire started avoiding my eyes. She smiled less. Her eyes were red more often. She said she was just tired. But tired people don't flinch when they hear someone mention Mark's name. I didn't want to suspect the two people I loved. I tried to push it away, tried to find reasons, tried to tell myself this was just a hard phase anyone could misread. Until I found this bottle of lubricant in Mark's things. Not in our bedroom, not in his personal drawer, but in a place he would never keep anything private. I opened it, and the familiar scent rose up. A kind he hadn't used in years. A kind no man buys just for fun. I gripped the bottle so hard my nails pressed into the plastic. I didn't want to believe what my mind was forcing me to accept. I didn't want to piece together all the fragments into a picture, so dark it made my stomach turn. I closed my eyes. The images still came. The perfume, the deleted messages, the strange looks between Mark and Claire, and the fear that the greatest loss of my life, my son's death, might not be the most painful thing I'd ever face. I opened my eyes and looked at the bottle again. Slaw. Ordinary. Harmless if it belonged to someone else. But it belonged to Mark. And its existence was in the wrong place, at the wrong time, wrong in every way. A feeling ran down my spine. If I dared peel back all these layers of secrets, nothing in my life would keep its old shape. And the scariest part was that I was ready to touch the truth, even if it meant bringing my family down all over again. I stared at the bottle of lubricant until my hand grew tired, then set it down like placing a dangerous piece of evidence back where it belonged. But the weight in my chest didn't go anywhere. It followed me through the night, waking me in moments of silence when I should have been asleep. From that moment on, every small detail in the house sharpened, as if it wanted to tell its own story. The security camera, I'd installed it just to check the house when we were away. I never thought I'd watch the footage at 2 a.m, but that night, I turned it on because the restlessness in my chest wouldn't let me breathe. And the video came up. Mark, my husband, appearing in the shared living room close to midnight. No lights on, just standing there for a few minutes before walking toward the dark hallway. A few minutes later came Claire. She walked down the stairs slowly, like someone trying not to make a sound. Her hair was loose, her head lowered, never looking at the camera. "Claire," My daughter-in-law, the one who usually went to bed before I did. But there she was, at that hour, stepping into the same space Mark had just left. I wanted to turn off the screen, but my body wouldn't listen. When Claire disappeared from the camera's view, the video froze on the last frame. A young woman with her shoulders pulled in, as if she'd just been through something she couldn't put into words. I rewound. Another moment, another day. Mark walked down first. Claire appeared after him. Again, not every night, but often enough to tell me this wasn't coincidence. Then came the sound. Mark's bedroom door closing right after Claire reached the top step. A small sound, but to me it was like a long scratch across a surface already cracked. I asked myself what I was really seeing. Claire had been quieter these days, her eyes red every morning, though she insisted it was from lack of sleep. But lack of sleep doesn't make someone stare at the floor every time Mark's name is mentioned. I sat down, my hands tightening around each other. There's no way Claire would do something like that, I told myself. She was the one I trusted most after losing my son. A gentle girl who flinched whenever someone raised their voice. A young woman trying to keep her husband's memory alive just by existing. It couldn't be her. But that denial stung like a needle when I remembered how Mark looked at her, with the same look he once gave me in our early years of marriage. Warm, lingering. A look that had no place between a father-in-law and his daughter-in-law. The next morning, I asked Mark about the lubricant. I tried to keep my voice steady. Why did you leave this here? Mark turned to me. Oh, that? I kept it in the car for convenience. Mark, always tidy, always organized, the man who never left personal things lying around, said that without blinking. But his eyes shifted away the moment I stayed silent for a few seconds. One evasive glance was enough to say everything. I wanted to ask more, but I knew if I pushed right then, I wouldn't be able to hold my voice together. Later that afternoon, when Claire came to the kitchen for water, I called her over. Have you thought more about moving out? Claire turned back, her eyes red as if she'd cried all night. She shook her head and tried to smile, but it didn't hold. I can't, Jenna. I miss him every day. Here is the only place where I don't feel like I've lost everything. Her voice cracked at the end. That hurt more than the suspicion twisting inside me. I pulled her into a hug. Claire trembled in my arms like a child afraid of the dark. I didn't know then that in that moment, when I thought I was protecting her, I was also holding the lie she was trying to keep afloat. I held her a bit longer, not because I wanted to, but because I was scared that if I let go, the truth would flood the space between us. That night, Mark fell asleep first. He turned his back to me like he had so often lately. I stared at the ceiling, feeling like someone had placed a stone on my chest. I knew I couldn't keep trusting my instincts alone. I needed the truth. Any truth was better than living in that in-between place, where I didn't know who to believe. I waited until Mark's breathing settled. Then I picked up his phone. I remember closing my eyes before unlocking the screen, as if part of me wanted to apologize to myself for what I was about to do. But when the screen lit up, the shaking in my hands shifted into something else, a heaviness sharp enough to ache in my chest. The most recent message was a small heart emoji. No name, just the icon. But the way it was sent, at an hour that didn't belong to work, with a kind of intimacy that wasn't hidden, told me more than enough. I opened the chat. The message underneath read, "Tomorrow? Same place." I set the phone down gently, as if dropping it too hard would make the truth shatter out loud. And then that moment I knew I'd crossed from suspicion into evidence, and there was no way back. I sat in the dark for a long time after reading the message, "Tomorrow. Same place." Each word pressed down on my chest. I didn't cry. I just felt a cold emptiness in my head, like my emotions had stepped out of my body for a moment so they wouldn't get crushed. The next morning, Mark said he had an early meeting. His voice was calm, steady, far too light for the weight of what I had just learned. I just looked at him, silent long enough that he had to turn away. I didn't ask where the meeting was or who it was with. I only said, "Drive safe." A sentence so normal that anyone overhearing would think nothing was wrong between us. But I knew, and Mark had no idea that I knew. He left the house at 8. I waited 5 minutes. Then I grabbed my keys and followed him. I drove slowly, keeping enough distance so he wouldn't see me. Mark wasn't someone who suspected much. Maybe because he thought he hid things well enough, or because he trusted me so much, he couldn't imagine I'd ever do something like this. He turned off the main road and stopped at an old abandoned housing complex, waiting for renovation. The parking lot was big but held only a few dusty cars. Mark parked in a hidden corner near a walkway that led down to an underground level. I pulled in behind a broken wooden fence. From there, I could see his car, but he couldn't see me. My heart was beating so fast I had to press a hand to my chest just to steady myself. A few minutes later, another car pulled up a short distance from Mark's. Claire got out. Claire. My daughter-in-law. The girl who sat at my dinner table every night. The girl who leaned on my shoulder when she missed her husband. The girl who once said, "Jenna, I'd never do anything to hurt you." She stepped out, her hair tied back in a rush, her eyes pointed at the ground, like she was afraid to look at her own reflection. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my hands went numb. Mark got out of the car first. He didn't hug Claire, he didn't touch her, but the space between them, too close to call it family, too familiar to call it normal, twisted my stomach. They didn't walk side by side, yet their steps fell into the same rhythm, unconsciously matched, like they'd done this more than once. They walked into the old building. I waited a few minutes. I didn't know what I was hoping for. Maybe that they were just talking. Maybe that I'd misunderstood everything. Maybe that Claire would step back out, look around, and realize she was in the wrong place. But no miracle came. In the end, I opened my car door and followed them, my heart pounding like it was trying to break out of my chest. The ground floor door was slightly open. I stood behind it and their voices carried out, not loud, but clear. "Claire, I feel guilty. This is wrong, really wrong." Her voice shook. The same kind of tremble I used to hear when she missed my son too much. Mark answered soft, low, steady. "You staying at the house is the right thing. Jenna needs you. And I need you too. And I need you too." The words cut into me like a blade. I stood frozen, my back against the wall, my hands shaking so badly I thought I might drop my own breath. Every word he said felt like something inside me breaking apart. I'd heard Mark say, "I need you" to me before. Those words once made me feel like our marriage had a foundation. Now, hearing him say them to my daughter-in-law smeared every old memory into something dark. Claire let out a small sob, trying to hold it back. "I don't want to hurt her." Mark sighed, then spoke in a voice I didn't even recognize anymore. "We're careful. Everything will be fine. We just need to keep things the way they are." I didn't listen to anything after that. If I did, I was afraid I'd collapse right there at the door. I turned away, each step heavy like walking through mud. I couldn't cry. It felt like my tears had abandoned me long before my heart cracked. I got into my car and closed the door softly so no one would hear. When I turned the key, my hands shook so hard it slipped and clicked against the console. I drove home like someone who couldn't feel anything anymore, everything around me blurring as my body fought not to collapse. But inside that chaos, my mind was cold in a way that scared me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. There was only one sharp, steady thought. I knew what I had to do. When I got home, I went straight to Mark's repair shelf. The bottle of lubricant I'd found the night before was still there. I picked it up, looked at it like it could speak. This tiny thing had just become the thread pulling every secret into the light. I opened the cabinet and took out the adhesive Mark used for woodworking, the kind so strong that if it touched your skin for a few seconds, it was almost impossible to remove. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about what might happen afterward. I only knew one thing. They had to stop. They had to be forced to face what they were doing. I swapped the liquids in the bottle. My hands were still shaking, but my mind wasn't. There wasn't a single voice telling me it was the right thing to do. But there wasn't one telling me to stop either. I wondered if I was becoming the villain, if I was doing something a decent person would never do. But then I remembered my son's face, his smile, the way he held Claire's hand when he was sick, like he was trying to keep her anchored to this world. I didn't feel like I was doing this for myself. I felt like I was protecting the last piece of my son that still existed. They were tainting the place he once lived, and I couldn't just watch. Around noon, Mark walked into the room, grabbed his wallet and keys. "I've got something to take care of. I'll be out for a bit." I only nodded. Claire appeared a few minutes later, holding a small bag. "I'm going to meet a friend for a little while." Her voice was soft, but not natural. They didn't look at each other in front of me, but I knew. I knew the meeting spot. I knew where they were going. I knew when everything would explode. And I stood in the silence of the house, feeling like I could hear every tick of a countdown neither of us had stopped, a bomb the three of us had set in motion long ago. I stood in the house after they left, listening to the door closing like a final period on everything we once called a family. I knew where they were meeting. I knew what they were doing. But I had no idea that what was about to happen would fall completely outside anything I'd planned. A little over an hour later, my phone vibrated. An unknown number. Hello? A man's voice came through, urgent but clear. Is this Jenna? We need a family member of Mark. He's at a location where an incident just occurred. We need you to come confirm. I froze for a few seconds. What incident? There was a fire alarm triggered by an old smoke system in a motel. We're not sure about injuries, but 2 people are trapped in a room. You should come right away. I didn't ask another question. I just grabbed my keys and walked out of the house. I couldn't picture what scene was waiting for me. I never wanted any of this to become public. I only wanted them to stop doing what they were doing behind my back. But the situation had slipped out of my hands the moment that fire alarm went off. When I arrived, a fire truck was blocking the front of the old motel, red lights flashing across the walls. A group of firefighters stood outside room 14, talking quickly. The motel manager, a short man with old glasses, was explaining, I don't know what they were doing in there. The smoke alarm went off, so I followed protocol and called 911. I walked toward them. One firefighter looked at me and nodded. Are you Jenna? Family of Mark? I only gave a small nod. No words were willing to come out. He opened the door just enough for me to see part of what was inside, and my world exploded without making a sound. Mark and Claire were stuck to each other. Both of them were trying to pull apart but couldn't. Claire was crying, tears running down her face, her breathing broken and panicked. Mark wouldn't look at me. He stared at the floor like it could swallow him whole and bury his guilt. 2 other firefighters went in carrying a special kit for dealing with industrial adhesives. One of them said to his partner, loud enough for me to hear, This stuff is strong, it's not going to be easy. Claire broke into sobs when she saw me. Jenna, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Her voice sounded like a child who'd made a mistake, but what they'd done was far beyond anything an apology could fix. Mark spoke quietly. Jenna, let me explain. His voice shook in a way I'd never heard from a man who always tried to look calm. But every word he said now only made my stomach twist. The firefighters told him to hold still so they could start separating them. Claire cried in waves, and Mark clenched his teeth from the pain. I stood a few steps away, my arms hanging at my sides, my whole body turning cold. No screaming, no tears, not even anger, just a hollow space widening inside my chest like a dark pit. A woman standing in the hallway recognized Claire. Isn't that the girl who lives with her? Another person looked at Mark and blurted out, That's her husband. I heard all of it. I stayed standing. I didn't feel the need to defend or explain anything. The truth was exposing itself without me saying a single word. The firefighters finally managed to separate them after a few long, breathless minutes. Mark sank into a chair, unsteady, while Claire wrapped herself in a cloth they handed her. She looked at me, eyes wide with fear and guilt. Mom. A small, broken call, like she still thought she was my daughter-in-law, still the girl I used to hold when she cried for my son. Mom, I'm sorry. That word, Mom, didn't save anything. It only pushed me deeper into myself. It was a kind of pain without sound, without tears, but sharper than any betrayal could be. And I stood there in a room full of smoke and flashing red and blue lights, watching my life collapse without making a single sound. The night after the incident, the house was so quiet, I could hear my own breathing echo softly in every corner. Claire packed her things, one small item at a time, her hands shaking and her eyes so red it looked like she had no tears left. She didn't look at me, only whispered, I'm leaving. I can't stay here another minute. I stood in the doorway watching her shove a sweater into her bag. Something about that scene tightened my chest. Not out of anger, but because of the collapse of 2 lives that had held on to each other in the wrong kind of darkness. Claire? I called her name as calmly as I could. Bookmark. She turned, her eyes swollen and unfocused. I'm not asking you to stay because of Mark. Don't misunderstand that. I paused for a few seconds so my voice wouldn't shake. I wanted you to stay because of my son. You were once family. Claire broke into tears again, but this time they were silent, her shoulders trembling like the slightest wind could knock her over. I stepped closer and put my hand on her shoulder. Not a hug, not comfort, just a hand, so she'd know I meant what I said. Mark came home late that night. He walked in like a man trying to make himself smaller so no one would see him. I sat waiting on the couch. He stood in front of me, the warm yellow light casting over a tired face I no longer recognized as the man I once lived with. "Jenna?" I didn't answer. Mark swallowed hard, then said the line he must have believed would fix something. It was a moment of weakness. I just wanted to help her heal. Claire was hurting and Enough. I cut him off, my voice low but sharper than anything I'd ever said before. "You betrayed this entire family. Not me. Not Claire." I looked straight at him, refusing to look away. "You betrayed our son." Mark opened his mouth, but nothing came out. No explanation could stand upright in this room. "I want you to leave the house." He blinked like he couldn't believe he heard me right. But when I stood and pointed toward the door, he understood. There was no argument, no pleading. Only an ending that had arrived long after the moment it should have come. Mark left without looking back. Claire sat on the bed, her hands twisted tightly together. I walked in and sat beside her. She avoided my eyes as if the truth might burn her all over again. "I have to say this," Claire whispered. I was lonely, empty, and Mark, he took advantage of that. I knew it was wrong. I knew, but I leaned on him in a way I shouldn't lean on anyone. Her words tightened something inside me, not out of anger, but because the pain in them was too real to fake. She spoke like someone peeling her own skin back, layer by layer. "I don't forgive you," I said slowly, "but I don't hate you either." Claire looked at me, breath catching in her throat. "I want you to live," I continued. "Live for real. Not leaning on the shadow of someone who's gone, not leaning on the weakness of someone still here. You need a new life. Not this house. Not me, not Mark, just you." Claire nodded, tears falling onto her tightly clasped hands. When the house was finally empty, I sat alone and let the silence settle over everything. I looked at the photo of my son, resting my hand on the frame the way I had so many times over the years. I realized I'd been trying to hold this family together with whatever scraps I had left. Memory, routine, the fear of living alone in the emptiness. I kept Claire close because I wanted to keep some piece of my son. I kept Mark because I didn't want to lose one more part of my old life. But today I saw it clearly. I'd been trying to save something that had been gone for a long time. Not Claire. Not Mark. Me, who I was before the grief, before the betrayal, before the truth. I need to stand up again. Not for revenge, not to prove anything, but for myself. The next day I booked a therapy appointment. I cleaned the house, I swept the corners I'd avoided for 3 years. I learned how to cook dinner for one again, without feeling empty. I stood in my bedroom, opened the window, and let the wind move through everything that had rotted, faded, and no longer belonged to me. On a quiet weekend afternoon, I stepped out onto the porch. The breeze was soft. The sky felt wide, but not heavy anymore. I rested my hands on the railing and looked out at the open space ahead without fear. "I don't need to pull anyone down," I told myself. "I just need to stand up." A simple sentence. But for the first time in years, I believed it. And I knew, from that moment on, my healing had finally begun. This is where the story ends. Thank you for spending your time with every moment of this painful but powerful journey. If this story touched you in any way, tell me, do you think Jenna made the right choice by choosing to walk forward on her own? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to follow more stories, emotional, layered, and full of healing, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next story.